On my favorite Villanova Wildcats, go Cats, and wow to the women of Notre Dame, winning it last night, getting it done, amazing. We will see you back here tomorrow night at 7 p.m. Tucker Carlson coming up. He's a big Wildcats fan too. See you tomorrow.
Well, good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson tonight. A caravan of more than 1,000 Central Americans, men, women, and children, is traveling across Mexico tonight. Mexican authorities are speeding them toward their destination, which is our country, our southern border. These are not refugees. They are border jumpers. They have no legal right to come here. And that's about the sum total of what we know about them at this point. We don't know if they have skills that we need, whether they speak English, whether they're gang members. We know nothing. Here's what they know about us. They know that if they can cross the border into California, they're set. Democratic politicians in that state will shelter them and give them benefits. From California, they can go anywhere in this country, just like millions and millions before them over the past 30 years. If you're wondering why America is not anything like the country you grew up in, this is why. Will anyone in power do anything to protect America this time? Or will leaders sit passively back as the invasion continues? Over the weekend and earlier today, the president sent a series of tweets that seemed to reflect frustration. Quote, "Act now, Congress," he tweeted at one point. "Our country is being stolen." Well, to that, official Washington scoffed. How dare the leader of our country pretend that we have the right to determine who comes here? What a racist. Here's Jim Sciutto, a former Obama political appointee who now poses as a journalist over at CNN. Watch.
As often happens with issues like this, we enter a fact-free zone. I mean, you got to fact-check the president on this. I mean, first of all, you heard that Fox News rhetoric, an army of migrants. I mean, it's not an army, it's a caravan. It's a group of folks who are seeking asylum. The president tweeted there are caravans, as if there are multiple groups of people kind of storming the border. That's not true. It's one group.
Just a group of folks seeking asylum, or propaganda from the Obama people pretending to be reporters. Shut up, America. That's the message. You have no right to complain. That's CNN's view, which means it's the left view as well. Is it America's view? Do voters agree? Do voters think that we have a moral obligation to admit every single person from around the world anytime who wants to come here, feed and house and educate them at our expense, even as our own middle class dies? Maybe voters do think that. I guess we'll find out in the midterm elections. This will help define those elections. Jessica Vaughn is Director of Policy of Studies, at the Center for Immigration Studies, and she joins us tonight. Jessica, thanks for coming on. So when the Obama guy over at CNN describes them as just a group of folks seeking asylum, where does that leave the United States? Does that mean that we can do nothing about this?
Well, if they're seeking asylum, what they should be doing is seeking it in the first safe country that they come to, which is Mexico in this case. But that's not what this is. This is a political stunt designed to challenge the United States and particularly the Trump administration. This is organized by activists. It's a walkathon for open borders. They know exactly what they're doing. They've recruited these people to join this group making their way to the United States. It's definitely a public relations stunt, and it's a challenge to our sovereignty, and the president needs to meet this challenge and not just carry on the way the Obama administration did and welcome them in. We don't need to accept their asylum applications. Heck, they're being trained on how to commit asylum fraud. So this is 1,000 people, but why wouldn't it be 100,000 people or 300,000 people? Why wouldn't it be the whole population of Salvador, the two-thirds that don't already live here? I mean, at some point that's going to happen because populations in poor countries are exploding. And what exactly is our recourse when that does happen? What do we do to prevent that from happening exactly? Well, that's why we have to prevent it from happening now. There's a reason this has been building to this point since the Obama administration essentially changed the rules on asylum, and since friendly judges stepped in and said you can't detain kids, they can be used as deportation shields. One thing we could do is prevent them from getting to the United States and do as we've done in the past and tell Mexico we want to come in and head this off before they get to our border. And, you know, we have a lot of leverage with Mexico, particularly on migration issues. It's not their job to control our border, but we can make it in their interest to help us prevent things like this from happening because, let's face it, Mexico gets a lot more out of our bilateral migration relationship than we do. So we need to use that leverage, maybe, you know, kind of tie it into NAFTA if we have to. But we don't need to just sit back and stand by while people take advantage of our lack of a secure border.
Right, so 60,000 Americans
an
died last year from drug ODs, and most of those drugs came from Mexico. So they're a hostile country. They're abetting the movement of these people here. Would it be possible to send the military to our border? I mean, why is this not, honestly, why is this not a hostile act against our country?
It is. I mean, it certainly should be taken that way. We could invoke emergency. You know, declare that this is an immigration emergency that requires extraordinary measures. The federal government has a plan for how to deal with a mass migration emergency. We've done it before, say when the Haitian boat people came. We sent the Coast Guard out to intercept them. There are tools and authorities that the president has that can be brought to bear here, perhaps even work with the state of Texas, depending on where they decide to try to make landfall in the United States. We can move money around. There are authorities we can take advantage of, and we can use our leverage with Mexico. We don't have to just sit back and wait for them to arrive.
Well, somebody better be thinking this through right now, because this is imminent. Jessica, thank you for that. Appreciate it.
Glad to be with you.
Enrique Morones is the founder of Border Angels, a pro-immigration group, and he joins us. Enrique, thanks for coming on.
Hey, Tucker.
So I understand that you're for more immigration into the country, but I can't imagine you would support people walking across Mexico and just showing up, expecting to be let in. If that were to happen a lot, we would no longer be a country. So what should we do with these people?
Well, Mexico is not a hostile nation, like you mentioned earlier.
Of course it is.
The people that are coming from, no, of course it isn't. And the fact that these people are coming from Central America is the same thing that's been going on since Reagan interfered in the Central American policies in the late 70s and 80s. These are people that are escaping violence, escaping hunger. They're looking for refuge, and they're trying to come into the country. And when you have a Border Patrol spokesman like Chris Harris encouraging them to come, telling them, just show up at the border and say asylum, are you going to get in? That's a lie. That's not the way it works. And it causes these people to flee. They're crossing. They think they're going to be able to get in. Most will not be getting in.
But I'm not really sure why I don't know why you would feel an obligation to defend the government of Mexico, which is abetting illegal immigration into our country, which has been literally for years, which has trained people explicitly with documents that we have on how to get into this country illegally. I don't know why you would be flacking for them. I don't know what's in it for you exactly, but let's stop lying about it. Mexico could stop this right now. Mexico is a very long country. It's a long way from Honduras to Tijuana. They could stop this, but they're not. This is an act of hostility.
The thing is that we allow the freedom of people to be able to travel freely within the country, as a lot of countries do in the world. And I will defend Mexico because you're lying. Why don't you show me a document where the Mexican government is training people, like you just said, to cross into the United States? The Mexican government isn't doing that. Are there people doing that? There may be.
Really? Because they were giving that, you know. I'm sorry. I win with superior knowledge here. The Mexican, no,
superior arrogance.
Of course, it is.
I know you're from San Diego, and your racism and ignorance is very well known.
Right? Okay.
Yeah,
look, the Mexican government has given instructions to people. I've seen them with my own eyes on how to get across the border. But the point is, this group of people could be stopped any time by the Mexican government, which, again, you feel the need to make apologies for, but they detain people all the time in their country from Central America, as you know. But they're not detaining these people because they say they're going to El Norte. So they're a hostile power. But why should we have to accept anybody who comes here?
Most people aren't coming to the United States. Most undocumented people go elsewhere. They have no desire to come here. Of the 250 million undocumented people in the world today, the United States has 11 million. And that flow has shifted dramatically, dropped 40% in the last 5.5 years.
But why should we take any? No, but you're missing it. Why should we take any? There are a lot of people who want to come here legally.
Yeah, but there's no way for these people to come in legally. And the United States interfering in these countries, the demand for the drugs, invading a sovereign land like Iraq, or interfering in the civil wars of Central America, that causes people to flee. The U.S. should be more welcoming.
So
and
our sins are the reason this is. So you hate America, is what you're saying.
I
don't know why. Actually, it's interesting. You're blaming America for illegal immigration into America. People
Central
come
America
here.
is part of America. Central America is part of America. Mexico is part of America.
The United States is a separate country. It's not the same as Honduras, actually. One-third of all Salvadoran citizens already live in the United States. So at what point can we say we've atoned for our sins in El Salvador?
Stop interfering in the policies of other countries. Stop taking their natural resources. Stop invading sovereign lands. You have a president.
Are we taking the natural resources of Honduras right now?
Remember Donald Trump? I mean, that guy, I mean, he's an embarrassment to the world. He says they're coming for DACA. DACA ended in 2000. People have to have been here by 2012. Donald Trump doesn't know what he's talking about.
Let me ask you. I'm not asking you your opinions on Trump. I'm not interested. I'm asking you about the policies that are. Hold on. The policies that affect all of us as Americans. And you're saying that Hondurans have a right to come here because we take the natural resources of Honduras somehow? Can you be a lot more specific?
Absolutely. The invasion of the United States of sovereign lands, whether it was the interference in Central America with the Reagan administration.
What do we do to Hondurans?
Well, have you heard of Iran-Contra? Have you heard of the fact that the United States is the #1 consumer of natural resources from other countries? The #1 consumer
in
of illegal
Honduras?
drugs?
So these people are coming here to punish us for bad things we did in Honduras?
No.
Are you representative of people on the left? Is everybody this dumb?
The United States has a
what are
large
you talking about?
responsibility. And when they invade sovereign lands, when they take from sovereign lands, they should be a more welcoming nation, and they are not.
But
there's no legal way for the people to come in. They're desperate. People are crossing borders all over the world.
I just want to have a rational conversation.
They should be able. Yes, we should have one.
All right.
Yeah, we should have a
Get back to me when you can explain what we did to Honduras to deserve this. Thanks, Enrique. First, they came for Confederate generals. Now, no statue is safe, even a statue dedicated to an American president who fought the Confederacy in the Civil War. A California town is now planning to demolish a statue of President McKinley. That story next. Well, whatever else you want to say about the left, they're not like the right. They don't sit around and talk about stuff forever. They just do it, right or wrong, usually wrong, but they move quick. Last year, the left targeted the nation's remaining Confederate statues for demolition. There was no vote on this anywhere ever. Sometimes they just destroyed the statues with mob violence. They got away with it, of course. Now they picked a new target, any statue that offends anybody in power. In Arcata, California, in the northern part of the state, a statue of President William McKinley is going to be torn down on the grounds that he pursued policies harmful to Native Americans. Of course he did. So did Abraham Lincoln. So, of course, we await Lincoln's monument's dynamiting. Not really, but you never know. Paul Pacino is on the Arcata City Council. He voted for the removal of McKinley's statue and joins us tonight. Paul, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, you're welcome.
So, you know, I'm not for tearing statues down without a vote, but of all the people whose statue you could tear down, why McKinley?
It's the only one we got.
Okay, good answer. But, I mean, here you have a guy who joined the Union Army at 18 to fight the Confederacy, spent, you know, years in battle. I don't think he has a reputation as a particularly cruel guy. He himself was a victim of gun violence, as you know. Why are you picking on him?
Well, I think if you look at all the stuff about him, see, you just mentioned a couple of things, but there's tons of other stuff about this guy. And when you take the totality of everything he was responsible for and what happened during his presidency, you look at it and you go, okay, positive, negative. If today I was offered that statue as a city councilman, I'd say, no, thank you. So basically, I'm correcting a 112-year-old error of judgment.
Well, I don't know if that's your place. I mean, you didn't put the statue there. Are you having a town-wide vote on this?
Here's what's happening. The city council 112 years or so ago decided to put it there, and the city council has the power to remove it. If indeed the citizens don't want that to happen, we have referendum and initiative here in California that happens constantly, and so it can be simply 1,000 signatures and be on the ballot.
Well, why don't you just let them vote anyway? I mean, you don't have to wait for them to do that. But hold on. I just wonder how you would feel. Let's say there's a Paul Patino statue. I hope, obviously, there never is. But let's say there was. How would you like to be assessed on every bad thing you did? I'm sure you've done good things. I'm positive you've done some pretty bad things. I can just tell. How would you like it if people said, we got to tear this statue down? He was flawed. I mean, shouldn't we be a little more forgiving than that of people?
Let me say this. I don't think any human being deserves a statue. We're all equals. I think it's a mistake to put statues up for humans. You know, Statue of Liberty, it works because that's not a human, okay? It's a replica or a stylized person. When you put up a human, you're always going to have a problem. No matter what human, whether it's Mussolini or whoever, it's a problem.
I have to say, I wasn't expecting you to say that. You're kind of winning me over a little bit with that argument, because I think that's actually true, and we shouldn't be worshiping politicians. Even the good ones are not that good. So I kind of agree. And I'm sure we don't agree on anything other than that. But I don't think that's a dumb point at all. Kind of an Islamic point, but still a pretty good point. But since his statue's up there, and no one living made the decision to put it there, you have to make an affirmative decision to take it down. And by doing that, aren't you really saying, you know, his sins outweigh the good things that he did? I mean, he was a good president. He fought against slavery. I mean, can we ask any more? And by the way, as I said, he was a victim of gun violence. Shouldn't that give him a pass?
You know, I totally see the good points, and I see the bad points. And I, as a elected official, a representative of the people in the town, I have to say, go deep inside and look at what would I do if I was faced with this any other time. And 13 years ago, it came before us before. And we didn't have a majority, so it stayed. This time, 13 years later, it came up again, and we had a majority. And so our majority voted for it to leave.
Have you guys solved all the problems in your town other than this? Is it like literally a utopia?
Hey, look, you know, nobody solves all the problems.
No, but I mean, you have like no crimes, and nobody has ever double parked, and no one's ever gotten divorced, and like, do you know what I mean? Nobody chews microwave burritos over Brussels sprouts. Like, you've got it all figured out. So like in your spare time, you're going to tear down a McKinley statue. Is that pretty much what's going on?
No, that's an opinion. Let me put it this way. You know, as a city councilman, I have to cover everything. This is just one item. I don't like wasting a lot of time on it. It's come to us before. It came before I even lived here, this issue. And it's like, okay, let's stop wasting time on it. I'm willing to take the freight. I'll make the decision to make that motion to move that thing so that we can be done with it and move on and not waste any more time.
All right.
So yeah, I really don't like wasting time about it.
Okay. Well, I disagree with you, but I do think you make a good point about not worshiping people. I'm with you on that. Councilman, thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Jason Nichols is a professor at the University of Maryland, and he joins us tonight. Professor, thanks a lot for coming on.
Thank you.
So if
Thank you for having
McKinley
me.
can't make the cut, I mean, unless you agree with the professor I just talked to, who I actually do think makes a really good point. We shouldn't be naming things after people, especially living politicians, whether it's Kennedy, you know, killed a woman, or Robert Byrd, the Klan recruiter, or any of these politicians should not be allowed to name things after themselves. I strongly agree with that. But like McKinley, really? Why is he so sinful?
Well, I think, you know, if we look at his history, he did some things in terms of what he did with the indigenous people, taking their land, giving it to white settlers, breaking up their autonomy. So I think he has some issues in his past. But at the same time, I think it's important for us, and it's interesting, this discussion, because I think I'm going to play the Republican here and say that you had a city council, a local group, who has made a decision for their community. That's what they're elected to do. And yet we, you and I, here in our shirts and ties here in Washington, are going to sit here and tell them that what they did was wrong and second question.
I feel fully empowered to pass judgment on the decisions that governments make.
Okay,
I'm not
but
claiming that
a local government that you have no You have no...
I mean, I'm allowed to have a view on that, and I do.
Absolutely.
And just because the government is small doesn't mean it doesn't make terrible decisions. I'm not that kind of conservative who thinks that, you know, small government... I mean, there's a lot of tyranny that takes place on city councils. I've certainly seen it, having lived in a small town. But here, I guess, is the point I'm making. We're retroactively judging people selectively. So you wouldn't have any problem with a monument to the Cherokees and the Trail of Tears, I would assume, because they're an oppressed people. But of course, they brought their slaves with them. They're African-American slaves. I'm not attacking the Cherokees. I'm merely pointing out that, like, history is a lot more complicated than we pretend it is. And you know that, of course, as a professor. So why are we now pretending that everything is in stark black and white and there are good people and there are bad people and nobody in between? That's a lie.
I think, you know, the primary thing when we're talking about presidents and what they've done is that we need to have a dialogue about the totality of what they've done. I'm just saying in this particular case, and the most important point to me is that activists say that they are going to raise the $65,000 that it takes to remove the statue. So it's not even going to be a burden upon the taxpayers.
No, but
it's going to be housed somewhere. They have a veterans place.
It's just your classic kind of Red Guard nonsense where we destroy the past thinking that that's going to create a new future. It's just stupid. I mean,
Tucker, that's not a destruction of the past.
Well, of course it is.
The past still exists. And they said they're going to move it indoors, just like I said with the Confederate statues.
Nobody is actually offended by this.
That's not true.
Offended by William McKinley?
There's a Native American community 20 miles south of Arcata who said that they don't like seeing this statue.
Okay, we're going to talk to one of them tomorrow. And look, I try to respect people's opinions.
Sure.
But taking down the statue will not improve the life of a single person in that community, as you know. But let me ask you this. As long as we're using these criteria, why do we have an FDR memorial here in Washington after he literally put in internment camps people on the basis of their skin color? Why do we have that?
I mean, I think
in living memory, by the way. I mean, some of the people who were in those camps are still alive. This wasn't 300 years ago. It was like 80 years ago.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think you're trying to make an argument that I'm not making, you know, or you're trying to sit here and debate with me on something on a point that I'm not making. What I'm saying here is, you know, just like you know, people may be offended by certain things in certain communities. I don't think we should necessarily force it upon that community to have that statue if they want to remove it. This isn't the Lincoln,
I'm not forcing it on Arcata, and I also think that the marijuana use level is so high in that town that I'm not sure that they'll ever kind of like get it together enough to take the statue down. I'm betting on that. But I do think there's a principle here that's worth talking about, and that is, how do we assess figures out of our past? Do we impose the values of the present moment, the transitory values that we have this right moment, on people retroactively, or do we take a broader view and say, a lot of people are heroic? Cesar Chavez, for example, flawed guy, beat up illegal aliens. I don't know, I think he was a net positive to the state of California in his labor organizing. Do you see what I'm saying?
What I'm saying?
We want to distort history for political reasons.
Well, here's what I believe. Why can't we take this McKinley statue and put it somewhere where we can have a dialogue about what he represented in, you know, both the good and the bad?
Because
and that
nobody knows anything about McKinley, as you know.
But that would be in a museum. That's where they can learn.
Because nobody actually cares about learning about history, and I bet you $1,000.
And that's a problem, and I don't think
it's a huge problem. I bet you can't find 15 people in America who can tell me 10 things William McKinley did. I honestly think that's true.
I believe
including the people who are calling
I think the people in Arcata can tell you 10 things that he...
I don't believe that for a second. I really don't. We're going to talk to what I think tomorrow. And I'm going to say, I'm going to sit here in silence as you tell me facts about William McKinley, and I bet you that'll be the shortest conversation ever aired on television. We'll see. Professor, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Tucker.
It's time for Mark Stein. He joins us with his take on the Mexico caravan and the demolition of the McKinley statue. An unlikely villain. Mark joins us next. Well, a caravan from Central America is walking through Mexico tonight. They're seeking to be let into this country. They're demanding it, actually. The president says he dislikes that idea, so of course he's being called a white supremacist.
A migrant army. Listen to that phrasing there. This is an army. It speaks to an invasion of brown people, right, from Central America. This is the implication there.
Easter wouldn't be Easter without a little brown scare. Right after his Happy Easter tweet, Donald Trump went right after immigrants.
The first guy, by the way, was Jim Scudo, who works at CNN, who was a political appointee for Barack Obama, now pretending to be a journalist. It's too much. Mark Stein joins us tonight. So, Mark, I guess the point that the left is making right now is that we have no right, under any circumstances, to deny people entry when they come here. Period. Doesn't matter who they are, where they're from, what skills they have. It doesn't matter. We have to let them in. Is that the position?
Yeah, basically, and kind of what's wacky about this to me, Tucker, as I understand it, basically half the illegal immigrant population, including these 1,100 people or whatever it will be up to by the time they actually hit the Rio Grande, about half the illegals in this country came here since 9/11. In other words, they broke into a country that's supposedly on orange alert. We're told we're on an orange alert. If law-abiding persons go to an American airport, they're barked at all the time. Be advised, the security coding for today is such and such. And yet, at the same time, 1,100 people have announced they're just going to walk into the country, and the United States government throws up its hands and says there's nothing we can do to stop them. Well, in that case, what the hell is the point of Orange Alert? Why are 300 million law-abiding Americans shuffling shoeless through their airports like a bunch of, like a bovine herd? If any of the 6.5 billion people who aren't American around the planet can just walk across the Rio Grande or take a flat-bottom boat and walk into the country. What's the point of Orange Alert?
What's the point of a government, actually? Because the point is that we're the problem. As one of our guests earlier told us, as Jim Scudo, or whatever his name is on CNN, told us, we're the problem, actually. These are the virtuous ones trying to get in. We're the impediment to their progress. Shut up, America, and obey.
And, you know, he probably doesn't know it. There was a French novel published 45 years ago by Jean Raspail, The Camp of the Saints. A lot of people on the left don't like it. But it actually predicted what's happening before our eyes. A bunch of people got in a ship at India and sailed for the south of France in this novel. And all the media commented, like the CNN guy you just quoted, what's the big deal about this? We are the ones. We are the sinful ones. We are the ones with the stain of all the wicked isms on our past. Imperialism, colonialism, racism. These people are the virtuous ones. Let them in and they will redeem us.
Do you ever get the impression you've been softened up for this exact moment, that people have been telling you to shut up and obey and that you have no moral standing and you're not allowed to give your opinion? Basically, so we get to the moment where you can just be told to step aside and let people come in your place.
I think that's largely what it is, in fact. And that's why I always pay great attention to the left's assault on language. Someone just said, you know, those of us who oppose this are anti-immigrant. Actually, no, I'm an immigrant. It's a rather boring thing to be because it involves going to government offices and filling in paperwork. But the left has appropriated that term, so it now effectively means an army of people who don't bother with paperwork, who simply, as your first guest said, simply from being in poor, impoverished countries whose resources the United States has pillaged, supposedly, they have the virtuous right to just walk in to the country.
So why should we care that a statue to President William McKinley, a victim of gun violence, by the way, is about to be torn down in Northern California? It feels like one of those things that's worth paying attention to. Why is it?
Well, I think it's worth paying attention to because it shows that when you hand the left a victory, they move on to the next thing. Rich Lowry, the editor of National Review, said on Fox News last year, he said he didn't feel terribly excited about defending Robert E. Lee and Jefferson Davis, but you can bet your bottom dollar that if they come after Washington and Lincoln, he'll be right there defending those guys. Well, they're now actually tearing down statues of American presidents, of a guy who took a bullet for his country. Once you hand them the first victory, they simply move on to the next ones. And you know what's interesting to me, Tucker? Obama, when he was talking about what he looked for in his judges, said the quality of empathy. Empathy requires us to be able to understand human beings in the age in which they lived. You're not tearing down a statue of McKinley. You're tearing down the representation of all the Americans who voted for him, agreed with him, supported him. You're in fact disowning your own history and saying, I'm just going to live in a hyper-present tense, disconnected from my past.
That is exact, and I knew you could explain it better than anyone I've ever met, and that is exactly right. And that's exactly what bothered me about it. Thank you for articulating that. Appreciate it.
Thanks a lot,
Mark.
Tucker.
See ya. America's military presence in Syria could be coming to an end, but some people are upset at the prospect of that. One of them joins us in a minute. Also, there's new video of something pretty amazing shot by a passenger on a commercial airliner just the other day. It's actually unbelievable. We're not going to describe it. We're going to let you decide what you think, and we'll show it to you in a minute. President Trump announced last week that American troops could be leaving Syria in the near future, alerting the rest of the country that there were American troops in Syria. Most people, I don't think, had any idea. He says now that ISIS territory has been overrun and the group has been mostly destroyed, we can leave. In Washington, this was very controversial, the prospect of American troops leaving yet another combat theater on the other side of the world. People don't like that here. James Carafano is the Heritage Foundation's Vice President for Foreign Policy and Defense Studies, and he joins us tonight. Mr. Carafano, thanks for coming on.
You bet.
So you would think, you know, the president, and I will say in his defense, he said we want to beat ISIS, we want to take away the territory that they control. He did it, and good for him. So can't we just declare victory and bring our guys back?
Well, it depends, right? It starts, but what is our interest in Syria? First of all, it's not having a peaceful Syria. Matter of fact, we don't give a damn about Syria. If you think about it, the Assads have been our enemies like forever. What does it matter, right? So we don't really care about Syria per se. So what do we care about? So one, we kicked ISIS's butt. What we'd hate happening is we walk away and ISIS just comes back again and reoccupies. That'd be bad. We don't want Iraq and Jordan to be destabilized. So we'd hate if Syria's problem kind of spilled over and destabilized countries we're trying to build a firebreaker from the Middle East falling apart. We don't want Israel and Iran to come to heads, because what Iran would love is just drive a super highway through Syria and come out the other end. And what we don't want is a repeat of what we saw a couple of years ago, which is to have a huge, humanitarian on steroid throw all these millions of refugees into Western Europe and destabilize that again. So we don't want those things to happen. So we should come out of Syria. But the question is, how do we come? We need to come out in a way that those problems don't come back and bite us.
Okay, so what you just said, which I think reflects the view of a lot of people here, it's not just you for sure, but undergirding it are two assumptions. One, that we have an obligation to defend all the countries that you mentioned. I'm not sure where that obligation comes from. And two, that our presence is inherently stabilizing rather than destabilizing, and I don't see any evidence of that.
Oh, absolutely. I think right now what we've done is we've created a wedge that keeps all those problems from spinning out of control. Right? The Syrians are not excavating masses of millions of people and sending them on the road. Israel and Iran aren't shooting at each other, and Jordan's holding together. Jordan's kind of a keystone state that really helps keep the region together, and Iraq's holding together. So, and ISIS was utterly crushed in record time. So those are real accomplishments.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
But we are also in a position to be held hostage because we do have 2,000 troops there.
Right.
One of whom was just killed the other day.
Right.
Got no press coverage here at all. I wonder how his family feels about that. Made me sad to read it. And we've killed about 200 Russians there.
Right.
We killed 200 Russians.
Right.
Why in the world would we ever want to be involved in anything like that?
Well,
Why
we
does
don't
that
want
make
to.
America safer?
Right, we don't want to. But what we want is a region that doesn't fall apart and creates bigger problems for us. So that's the only issue, which is you want a policy that doesn't do what Barack Obama did, which is say, declare victory and walk away, and then what happens is all the problems pour back in, and you actually have a bigger problem than when you started. If you remember, I mean...
So do you think that Obama not being engaged in the region was the reason there was a Syrian civil war?
No, but because the way we pulled our troops out of Iraq and when we did, and the way we laid the politics to unravel in Iraq, that allowed the problem of Syria to spill over and destabilize Iraq and created a caliphate, which then in turn attracted tens of thousands of foreign fighters from all over the world to the region, and now we're worried about all these tens of thousands of foreign fighters.
Can you remind me really quick why I should think Assad is bad? I mean, why I have a moral obligation to be against Assad? I mean, I'm not for Assad. I don't really care.
Assad, let's be clear. Assad is a bad genocidal dictator. Do we care? Is that our problem? I actually don't think so, no. What we care about is our interests, right?
You don't think we're being used at all? I mean, the whole Gulf would like us to get deeply involved in this because they're worried about Iran. And we seem to be doing their bidding here a little bit.
Well, I mean, I think, for example, the way this administration did Iraq and rolled up ISIS, where we didn't put tens of thousands of troops back in. We put a modicum of force back in, and we had people on the ground really do that. And other people had to step up, and other people who were doing bad things kind of backed off. So I think there's a middle ground between doing nothing and walking away and letting the house burn down, and doing the next Vietnam War.
When Lindsey Graham says it's a disaster that we might put
well, then you should be suspicious because Lindsey Graham said that, right?
Well, that's, I mean, I
always
feel
wrong.
like 100% of the time.
Yeah.
Almost like on purpose.
Right.
Almost like if you want to know what time it is, ask him and it's the opposite time.
Yeah. So I mean, I think it makes no sense for the United States to be in Syria forever. Absolutely, totally with you. Love to walk away. How we walk away really matters.
Okay, now you're making me feel better. I will say that. Thank you.
All right.
Good to see you. Amazon has become so ubiquitous that even the Pentagon is dependent on them all of a sudden to store their classified data, your classified data. That story is next. It's part one of our week-long series, Tech Tyranny, and it's interesting. Stay tuned. Every night this week, we'll be bringing you a piece of our series, Tech Tyranny, recovering the ways that powerful tech companies are dominating American life in a way that has never happened before in American history. Most people are ignoring it. They shouldn't be. It's changing everything. Amazon's power over data is so great now that even the U.S. military is seeking their help. Within a few weeks, the Defense Department is expected to request a $10 billion contract that will allow Amazon to become the sole provider of cloud computing services to the military. What does this mean? A story we're not going to ignore. Matt Stoller is a fellow with Citizens Against Monopoly, and he joins us tonight. Matt, this is one of those stories that, like a lot of stories right now, they're just kind of passing people by. And no one's stopping to say, well, what is this, and what are the implications of it? So let me ask, what is this, and what are the implications of this?
So this is what the Pentagon calls a potential revolution in how they buy information technology. And information technology is the heart of everything right now,
yes,
including war. So this is a decision by the Pentagon, or potential decision by the Pentagon, to do something very unusual, which is to not have multiple suppliers of a key resource that they rely on, in this case, data. And they are handing over an important bottleneck of our national security to Jeff Bezos and Amazon. And that's something that should be very concerning to people, because Jeff Bezos has relationships, Amazon has relationships all over the world with all sorts of entities that could that have a reason to manipulate and undermine American national security interests. And even if they don't, even if Amazon does a great job and we have no other redundant cloud computing services, last year, because of a typo in an Amazon data center, a whole bunch of websites, 150,000 websites went down, including big ones like Pinterest, parts of Slack, and even the Securities and Exchange Commission. So it is a really dangerous thing to award a contract over such a vital resource to just one company. And the Pentagon needs to split this among multiple cloud computing service companies so that there's some basic redundancy, and so that Jeff Bezos is not the sole guy who's in charge of this.
A company that has relationships with foreign governments that we don't fully understand, as you pointed out. This seems nuts. Why would we do something like this? Why would the Pentagon do something like this?
I know, it's like a bad movie plot or something like that. I mean, what's the first thing that you're going to do if you get into a war with the United States? You know, you would undermine the Pentagon's ability to access its data. And if there's only one provider of data, if it's just Amazon AWS, it's much easier to do that than if you have multiple sources of supply. It's just basic national security strategy. So I'm not exactly sure what the Pentagon is thinking. I think there are probably multiple different power centers in the Pentagon that are thinking about this. They might believe that, you know, Amazon, if you just award it all to one company, that they will have the best security. But then, of course, if there's penetration of that one security barrier, then, you know, all your eggs are in that one basket. So there's different arguments for why you'd award a contract like this to one company, but it's probably a bad idea, and it's contra the long history of American national security policy.
Has any company had more power in the history of this country or any other country than Amazon or Google, ever?
It's a really good question. I mean, I think you could You could potentially look at Standard Oil in the 1880s and 1890s, but they didn't have the ability to profile individuals, to manipulate individuals and individual companies the way that Jeff Bezos and the way that Larry Page does. So it's hard to say, but this is crazy.
They could control your energy, but they had no control over your mind. Which seems a big difference to me. Matt Stoller, thank you for paying attention to this while most people aren't. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks. Our series Tech Tyranny will continue every night this week, and again and again and again, because we think it's worth investigating the growing and dangerous powers of big tech, because nobody else is. Up next, something very odd was spotted by a passenger on a commercial flight over the Mediterranean the other day. We're going to show you the video, and you can decide for yourself what you think it is. It's amazing.